Well, it seems unlikely that South Africa will get any relief from U.S. Steel and aluminium import tariffs. We're going to cross live now to the United States, and that's where our correspondent Simon Marks is. He's going to tell us why this may not be so. Now, Simon, first, was there ever any indication in the first place that South Africa could possibly be included in the list of countries that could get relief?
Well, only in the sense, Vuyo, that the United States government made it apparent that it was willing to cut side deals with any country that made a sufficiently compelling case. But look, I think it was always going to be highly unlikely that South Africa would rise to the level of those countries that we believe are going to be granted some level of relief from President Trump's more protectionist policies. Among those countries that are receiving relief, South Korea, Brazil and Argentina. That relates to steel and aluminium quotas, but certainly no relief being offered to the European Union, to China, to Turkey, to Canada, those countries that are in the forefront of President Trump's protectionist battles inside the White House. As to whether South Africa was ever in a position to make a sufficiently compelling case, that's hard to know, not least because these announcements come shortly after President Trump, of course, took to Twitter for the first time in his presidency using the word Africa on Twitter and speaking very critically of what he said he had learnt from Fox News about the treatment of white farmers and the expropriation policies of President Cyril Ramaphosa's government. And certainly we know that advisors to President Trump, including the influential Cato Institute think tank here in Washington, D.C., have been saying that just on the land expropriation issue, the South African government has been flirting with the possibility of finding itself out of AGOA, the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, here in the United States. So with that sort of background music to all of this, it would almost certainly have been very difficult for Rob Davis and his team to persuade the Trump administration that South Africa was a worthy recipient of any kind of carve-out.
Well, I know that, some people think that very little, if anything, is beyond Donald Trump. But, to have a tweet about farm murders and land expropriation to stand between a country and a potential trade partner would be, like a bit ridiculous. But do we know what the criteria was, Simon, for the countries that qualified to be selected?
Essentially, how Donald Trump feels about those countries and how his Commerce Department and his trade advisor feel about the role they play with regard to bilateral trade with the United States. This hasn't been a scientific process. This hasn't been a process whereby, you've got to meet a certain bar. This has been, who is the United States willing to cut a proactive side deal with? And it's a very small list of countries, because this issue of trade and protectionism goes to the heart of the Trump presidency. And to be fair to President Donald Trump, he told voters on the campaign trail back in 2016 he would be pursuing a more protectionist approach to trade policy. He is doing exactly that, and President Trump likes to be able to turn around to his base, particularly in farming and industrial states, the voters that sent him here, many of them in the first place. He likes to be able to go back to them and say, look, I'm doing what I told you I was going to do. South Africa, the relationship between the United States with South Africa today, with President Trump at the helm in the White House, it's just not a particularly high priority relationship for this White House. And it's not a great surprise to observers here that South Africa wouldn't have won any kind of tariff relief.
Simon, before I let you go, something unrelated to steel and aluminium. Boston consulting firm Bain Company acknowledging that its work on the diagnostic report on the South African Revenue Services was shoddy, that it did not meet with senior officials that are involved in SARS's modernization. That's an incredible admission.
It is an extraordinary admission, described variously by Bain executives as a massive failure. In a statement, the company suggested that Bain had been overly eager to try and help transform South Africa. In hindsight, a spokeswoman said there were warning signs that we should have flagged earlier and escalated accordingly. In our eagerness, we were blind to the potential of individual agendas that may have been at play. The company insists it's not going to return any of the money that it earned in South Africa to the government, but it stands accused and appears in large measure to be accepting that it was responsible in some degree for the dismemberment of SARS that took place under the auspices of President Zuma, and allegations that are being made concerning Bain Company's role in all of this is that it was susceptible to bribery and corruption at the hands of some of those Zuma apparatchiks. So this is another massive embarrassment for a major American accounting and consulting firm. Remember that other Western firms have been caught up in the maw of South African corruption, including, of course, KPMG and many others. But Bain Company acknowledging a massive failure, but saying they're not planning to give any of the revenues back that they earned in South Africa.
Simon Marks, that's where we're going to leave it for this evening. Thank you very much for your time, our U.S. correspondent, Simon Marks, and ending our interview with that Bain admission that it might have been a pawn in political wrangling designed to help Jacob Zuma avoid scrutiny into his own taxes. We'll be